ਗੱਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਹੈਗੀ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੇ ਗੁਲਾਮ ਆ। ਕੈਪਟਨ ਬਾਦਲ ਦੇ ਹੱਥ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਤਾਕਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ। ਜੋ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਰਡਰ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਉਹੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਤੀਜੀ ਧਿਰ ਵੀ ਆ। ਭਾਈ ਰਿਲੀਜਨ ਦੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ, ਇਹ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਬੈਟਲ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਭਵਿੱਖ ਨਿਸ਼ਚਿਤ ਹੋਣਾ ਆ। ਜੇ ਕੈਂਸਰ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਫੈਲ ਰਿਹਾ, ਉਹ ਇਹ ਪੁੱਛ ਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੂੰ, ਹਿੰਦੂ ਨੂੰ, ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਨੂੰ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਉਹ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਨੂੰ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ। ਗੱਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਹੈਗੀ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੇ ਗੁਲਾਮ ਆ। ਕੈਪਟਨ ਬਾਦਲ ਦੇ ਹੱਥ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਤਾਕਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ। ਜੋ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਰਡਰ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਉਹੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਤੀਜੀ ਧਿਰ ਵੀ ਆ। ਜੇ ਆਰਡਰ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦਾ ਚੱਲਣਾ ਹੈ,
ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲੇ ਪਾਵਰ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਣਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹੋ, ਤਾਂ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਹੈਂਡਲ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇਗਾ? ਕੀ
ਮੈਂ ਦੱਸਦਾ ਜੀ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੈਪਟਨ ਤੇ ਬਾਦਲ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ ਨਾ, ਇਹ ਉਹ ਰਾਜਨੀਤਿਕ ਸ਼ਖਸ ਹੋਣਗੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੰਤਰਰਾਸ਼ਟਰੀ ਕਾਨੂੰਨਾਂ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਕੇਸ ਚਲਾਵਾਂਗੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਨਸਲਕੁਸ਼ੀ ਦਾ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੁਟਕਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਹੱਥ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਸਹੁੰਆਂ ਖਾਧੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਕਿ 3-3 ਮਹੀਨਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਜ਼ਾਦ ਕਰਾ ਦੇਣਗੇ।
ਇਹ ਪੰਨੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਆਏ ਹੋਏ ਆ, ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਪਏ ਨੇ ਜੀ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਣੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ, ਮੈਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਬੋਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਕੌਣ ਮੰਗਦਾ ਪਿਆ ਜੀ? ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕੋਈ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਵਾਲੀ ਕੋਈ ਕਿਸੇ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਣਾ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ, ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਸੀਗਾ, ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸੂਬਾ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਮ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਖੂੰਦਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਖਤਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ। ਇਹ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਉੱਥੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ, ਜਦ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੋਕ ਇੱਥੇ ਹੈ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ, ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ, ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕਿਉਂ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਹੋ?
ਭਾਜੀ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਉਮਰ ਹੈ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ?
ਮੇਰੀ ਉਮਰ ਨੂੰ ਛੱਡੋ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਮਰ ਕੀ ਹੈਗੀ
ਭਾਜੀ? ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅਖਬਾਰਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ, ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ। ਇਹ ਉਹ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਮੈਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ 3 ਲੱਖ ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤਾਂ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ। ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ 30 ਸਾਲ ਦੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਹੋਸ਼ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਈ, ਜਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੁੱਤੇ ਹੋਏ, ਜਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਹੋਸ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਈ, ਜਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦਾ। ਮੈਂ ਉਸ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ ਦੇ ਲਈ 3 ਲੱਖ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤਾਂ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ, 10 ਲੱਖ 10 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਫੈਮਿਲੀਜ਼ ਅਫੈਕਟ ਹੋਈਆਂ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਹੋਇਆ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇਖੋ, ਅਖਬਾਰਾਂ ਪੜ੍ਹੋ, ਨੀਮ ਬੇਹੋਸ਼ੀ ਦੀ ਹਾਲਤ ਤੇ ਡੋਡਿਆਂ ਚੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਿਕਲੋ। ਅਸੀਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ। ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਦੇ 200 ਮੁੰਡਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੰਦਰ ਹੈ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੈਪਟਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ, ਡੀਜੀਪੀ ਗੁਪਤੇ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ ਵੀ 200 ਮੁੰਡਾ ਅੰਦਰ ਕਿਉਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ। ਰੋਜ਼ ਐਸੇ SMS ਆ ਰਹੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ, ਕਿਉਂ SMS ਆ ਰਹੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਰੈਫਰੈਂਡਮ ਦਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਨਾ? ਕਿਸ ਗੱਲ ਤੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ?
ਆਪਣਾ ਹੀ ਬੋਲੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ, ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਸੁਣੋ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੁਣਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ।
ਬਾਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਡੋਡੇ ਖਾਦੇ ਹੋਏ, ਮੈਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਸੁਣ ਲਾਂ? ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿਸਦਾ, ਗਰਕ ਹੋਇਆ ਪਿਆ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ।
ਸੁਣ ਲਓ ਪੰਨੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ,
ਕੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਪਏ ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ?
ਪੰਨੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸੁਣ ਲਓ,
ਬਾਹਰ ਬੈਠੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ, ਭੜਕਾਉਂਦੇ ਪਏ ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ। ਆਪ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ
ਭਾਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲੇ ਲੱਗਦੇ ਹੋ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਮਾਰੇ ਆ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਨਾਮ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਫੋਨ ਨੰਬਰ ਕੀ ਹੈ? ਮੈਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰਾਂ ਕਿਹੜੇ ਪਿੰਡ ਚੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ। ਚਲੋ ਜੇ ਇੰਨੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੱਡੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ 30 ਮਾਰਕਾਂ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਹੋ, ਦੱਸੋ ਆਪਣਾ ਨਾਮ ਤੇ ਪਿੰਡ ਦੱਸੋ ਆਪਣਾ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਦੱਸੋ ਜੀ ਆਪਣਾ।
ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਮੇਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਤਾਂ ਸੁਣੋ
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਨਾਮ ਦੱਸੋ ਤੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਪਿੰਡ ਦੱਸੋ। ਅਸੀਂ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ।
ਦੇਖੋ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਆ ਪੰਨੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ।
ਨਹੀਂ ਜੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਇਹ ਭਾਜੀ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਮਾਰੇ ਆ। ਬਾਹਰ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਰਾਮ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਪੀਸਫੁਲੀ।
ਪੰਨੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਤੇ ਚਲੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਨੇ ਕੰਮ ਦਾ।
ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ
ਮੇਰਾ ਵੀ ਸੁਣ ਲਓ
ਭਾਜੀ 1 ਲੱਖ ਫਾਰਮਰ ਸੁਸਾਈਡ ਕਰ ਚੁੱਕਾ ਹੈ। ਉਹ ਬਾਹਰ ਦੇ ਬੈਠਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਰਵਾਇਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਫਾਰਮਰ ਸੁਸਾਈਡ, ਤੁਹਾਡੀਆਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਰਵਾਇਆ, ਤੁਹਾਡੀਆਂ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਮਰਵਾਇਆ।
ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਤੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਇਕੱਠੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੇ ਘਰ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਹੈਗੀ।
ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੇ ਕੱਲੋਂ ਕਾਹਤੋਂ ਬੋਲਣ ਦੇ ਹੋ? ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਮੰਗਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ, ਫਿਰ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੋ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਗਦਾ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕਾਹਤੋਂ ਬੋਲਣ ਦੇ ਹੋ? ਫਿਰ
ਮਤਲਬ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ
ਭਾਈ ਮੇਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੁਣੋ, 1 ਮਿੰਟ ਸੁਣੋ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਗਦਾ?
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਚੱਕਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਗੇ ਹੋ, ਆਪਣੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਚਲਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਇੱਥੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਰਵਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ।
ਭਾਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਦਾ ਪੈਸਾ ਇਕੱਠਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਾਣਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ? ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਰਿਹਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਰਗੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਦੇ ਟਾਊਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਛੱਡੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੇ। ਉਹ ਬਾਹਰ ਬੈਠਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਲਜ਼ਾਮ ਲਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਉੱਥੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਮਾਰੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਜੀ। ਅੱਛਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਏਦਾਂ ਕਰੋ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਸ਼ਾਰਟਕਟ ਕਰਦਾ। ਭਾਈ ਜੀ ਏਦਾਂ ਕਰੋ, ਆਪਣਾ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਦਿਓ, ਸਵੇਰੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਨਿਬੇੜੀਏ ਕੰਮ ਨੂੰ। ਐਡਰੈਸ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ?
ਚਲੋ ਓਕੇ, ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ।
ਐਡਰੈਸ ਦਿਓ ਆਪਣਾ।
ਨਹੀਂ ਚਲੋ
ਐਡਰੈਸ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਬਾਤ।
ਭਾਈ ਜੀ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਦਿਓ ਆਪਣਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ।
ਚਲੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੈਕਸਟ ਕਾਲ ਲਾਈਨ
ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ
ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਦਿਓ।
ਸੁਣ ਲਓ ਵੀਰ ਜੀ, ਇਹ ਸਵਾਲ ਕਰ ਲਓ ਫਿਰ ਬਾਅਦ ਚ ਆਫ ਦੀ ਏਅਰ ਸੁਣ ਲਿਓ। ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੀਰ।
ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਹੈਗੀ ਜੇ ਪੜਨਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੇਰਾ ਨਾਂ ਕੀ ਹੈ? ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਇਹੀ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਾਉਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ। ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ
ਨਹੀਂ,
ਦੱਸੋ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਕੀ ਤਕਲੀਫ
ਭਾਜੀ
ਹੈ?
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਕਾਹਤੋਂ ਬੋਲੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ? ਫਿਰ
ਚਲੋ,
ਵੋਟਾਂ
thank-
ਪਵਾ ਲਿਓ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਲਟ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਦੱਸੋ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਭਾਜੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਆਜ਼ਾਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ,
hold
ਮੈਂ
on,
ਭਾਰਤ
hold on.
ਦੇ ਲਈ ਗੁਲਾਮ ਰੱਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਕਹੋ ਜੇ ਦਮ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਹੋ ਤਾਂ।
ਨਹੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ, ਇੱਕ ਮਿੰਟ ਪਨੂ
ਉਹ
ਸਾਹਿਬ,
ਮੈਂ ਇਹ
let
ਗੱਲ
me
ਤੇ-
answer.
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੇਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੁਣਨ ਨੂੰ
ਵੀਰ
ਤਿਆਰ ਹੀ
ਦੇਖੋ,
ਨਹੀਂ, ਮੈਂ ਜੋ
ਏਦਾਂ
ਗੱਲ
ਹੈਗਾ।
ਭਾਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਹੀ ਗਲਤ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਸਾਡੇ 200 ਮੁੰਡੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫੜ ਕੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਟਾਰਚਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਆ। ਰੋਜ਼ ਐਸਐਮਐਸ ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਉੱਥੇ। ਜੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੋਣ ਦਿਓ ਰੈਫਰੈਂਡਮ
ਨਾਲ। ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਹੁਣੇ ਇੱਕ ਦੋ ਕਾਲਰ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਅਗਰੈਸਿਵ ਹੋ ਗਏ, ਕਾਲਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਡੋਡੇ ਖਾਦੇ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਖਾਦੇ ਆ, ਇਹ ਦਿਵਾਉਣਗੇ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ, ਇਹ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦਾ ਹੱਲ, ਇਹ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਮਤਲਬ ਜੇ ਏਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੋਲਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਜੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦਾ ਫਿਊਚਰ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਣਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਰਮ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਹਿਣ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ 'ਚ ਕੁਝ ਬੋਲਾਂ। ਦੂਜੀ ਗੱਲ, 2020 ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ, ਦੁਨੀਆ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਦੀ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਗਈ ਹੈ। ਸਾਇੰਸ ਮਾਰਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਭੇਜਣ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਕਿਹੜੀ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ? ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਫੋਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਕੁਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ 10-10 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਆਉਣਾ, ਮੇਰਾ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ, ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨਸ਼ੇ ਤੋਂ ਮੁਕਤੀ ਦਿਵਾਓ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਮੁਕਤੀ ਨਾ ਦਿਵਾਓ। ਇੰਡੀਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਉਸ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਆਏ ਹੋ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੂਜੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਨੇ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਵਾ। ਇੰਨਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੌਂਕ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਬੈਠੋ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਹੈਲਪ ਨਾ ਲੈਣੀ ਪਵੇ।
Hello everyone, this is Abhinandan and I welcome you all to Brahmast. Today we would be doing a Marxist Leninist analysis of the whole farmers protest, just to examine the active elements which are in this farmers protest 2020. Of course, I do not deny that there are farmers in this protest, but then we also need to understand the active elements to understand where exactly these people are coming from, perhaps the organization building that they have in this protest. We can understand that they are running this protest for last more than about 54 days now, and it's very organized in a way that it has blocked all kind of national media. At the same time, it has blocked all kind of you can say a two-way talk between the farmer and the government, and basically the farm unions have taken up on themselves to be the leaders of these farmers, and kind of you can say are creating a mockery of the whole parliamentarianism, the whole process of the functionality of the parliament. So that's one thing. And on the other hand, we have people like Gurpant Wantman Pannu, who is basically running a referendum 2020, which is basically a secessionist movement against the Indian government. He basically is trying to instigate people to kind of vote against the Indian government and to vote for a separate Sikh state that would be created within India. That's the Punjab part of that's the Punjab state. Now that also is very much an active element, because this guy has recently announced a total of about 2.5 lakh US dollars for any person who would be unfurling the Khalistani flag on the India Gate on 26th January, which is the Republic Day of India. So that's basically to harm the image of India and to gain kind of a political recognition in the whole world politics, geopolitics. So this guy is already talking about for the last 2 years, or perhaps more than that, about the UN, where he would be taking this case, the referendum 2020, and for that he needs votes, and that's the whole reason behind he being active in this protest for last about he was always active in this year, particularly because he had already announced the referendum 2020, but by the way it has failed. But in the backdrop of this farmers protest, he again became very active and now is doing a show on a YouTube. He has a channel called Sikh for Justice. I mean, that's an organization, but then they also have in the same name a YouTube channel where they're running the same propaganda day in and day out. And apart from that, we also have a few political parties to be examining today, like that of Aam Aadmi Party, which is kind of very ambitious towards the Punjab politics. I don't know why he has such an inclination towards it. He's neither a Punjabi, but aims to be a chief minister of Punjab. So he has his own gain. We have seen that even in the last election that happened in Punjab, how how he was in contact with the Khalistani elements, and that was surfaced in a lot of newspapers last time when there was an election in Punjab. On the other hand, we have Congress, who again is kind of, you can say, uh, basic reason of all the the sentiment that the Sikh people, the anti-establishment sentiment that these people, the people of Punjab, basically the one that they carry, is all, I would say, something that Congress has given them in a longer run, how they have actually taken care of the politics and the people of Punjab, their activities, their selfish or opportunistic, I would say, stance and instances where they have really gone uh, into a communistic conspiracy to really win over Punjab through political for the political gains. So that's also one of the very important thing that we need to understand, because they are always siding with these elements, and we've been that's very evident. That's not something that we need to really dig deep into. That's very much that we have always seen in respect to Punjab, what the attitude of Congress and Congress people have. Now, thirdly, there is also one very, I would say, active element that has came on the surface now. So that's the Akali Dal, which was always, so far, was being a part of the National Democratic Alliance. That's the NDA, and was a partner of BJP in the central government. However, we have seen that in the backdrop, in the wake of this farm law, when it was about to come in November, uh, Akali Dal also separated themselves from BJP, and now are in, I would say, now they're basically the forerunners for the next election in Punjab. So these are some of the active elements that we would be talking about more. This video is presented to you by Brahmast, thanks to Surbi Suman, and the content in association with this video is created by me. That's Sanatan Defense League, going to be a anti-communist think tank that I'm working on. So this, what you can see in front of you, are the three farm laws that the government has brought. And these bills came in existence after being passed by both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So as we know that it all started from the month of September, it was basically 31 farm unions which together held a protest on 25th of September and called it as a Punjab Bandh against the farm laws which were being enacted. And they also called these farm laws as Kala Kanun, brought against the interest of the farmers. And this was basically to help the corporates like Ambani's and Adani's. So these 31 farm unions, if you talk about them, so they have their own lineage, or I would say an inclination into the socialist and communist ideologies, and they're basically those people. If I can just tell you what these people are coming, where exactly these people are coming from. So when I visited the Singhu border the second time, I was just going through one of the libraries, kind of a temporary library that they have created over there, where they're giving, or kind of giving an opportunity to borrow a book, read it, and then return it. So that's kind of an temporary library that they have created over there. And maximum books that you would see would be the communist literature over there. So I personally got two kind of pamphlets from there. One is in Hindi, that's more about Lenin and his revolution, and the other one was the Communist Party and Parliament. So this is a pamphlet which was basically, you can say, the thesis adopted by Communist International in 1920 in its summer session of July and August. Now, this historically was also the second Congress of the Communist International, where M. N. Roy, Manvendranath Roy, who was, you can say, the progenitor of the Communist Party, Tashkent, uh, in the early 1921. So when I went there and I got this book, what really fascinated me was the reality with which these people they work in our society, and it's always a vote what they talk about, what their inclinations are. So in this very pamphlet, if I talk about the very first page, there's this article which has its headline, "The Communist Party and Parliamentarianism." So this basically talks about how Socialist Party, or beat the Communist Party, into its second uh, Congress of Communist International. Then itself, they had decided, that's pretty much 100 years in the past, they have already decided that they would be using Parliament nothing but kind of a stage to agitate and to create, I would say, an anarchy. So basically, it's nothing but a big circus. Parliamentarianisms is nothing for them but a mockery wherein they can use and make more use of the parliament, and by putting their legislative into the parliament and agitating it over a period of time, to then subsequently create a class consciousness, which would then create a hostility towards the ruling class. So they are preparing to organize the masses, the I would say the proletariats against the bourgeois, which is the ruling class. And this for last 100 years have been in practice and on paper in their strategies of communism and socialism. Now, these farm unions are nothing but one of the same people. As you can see, that it has been more than 10 talks so far with the government, and these people are not ready to accept or to settle on anything so far. What they're simply demanding is a repeal of this law, which, if let's say the government hypothetically would even accept, would again be nothing but a mockery, because it's the Lok Sabha, it's the people, the chosen people in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, and of course the President of India, who has brought these farm laws. And if that ever happens, if this farm law has been taken back, it's really going to be a win for these socialist, communist termites, which are living in India, and is trying to break it from inside. So we really need to understand, when these socialist farm unions, when they call this farm law as Kala Kanun, and when they say that it's not in the interest of farmer, well, this is all nothing but a hearsay that they have created, and basis that they have also convinced the poor farmers that on in a longer period, this farm law would take away their land holdings, and big corporates like Ambani's and Adani's would be basically the owner of their lands. And kind of fear mongering that they have been able to, level of fear mongering that they've able to succeed in creating, like they have done last year for Shaheen Bagh, and that gives them, you can say, the basis to then come on street and protest and block national highways. So that's exactly which is in practice here. We are seeing it from September itself. These people started gathering first in Punjab, and basis also that these socialist and communist parties and their affiliated fronts like farm unions or trade unions, they have a cadre based organization which is democratic centralist. So they have their cadre in all villages. They have their cadre people on district level. Then they have their representative on a on a central committee level, and which then finally forms the Communist Politburo, where there's again democratically chosen, I would say, the chairman of it, and that becomes, you can say, the leader of the Communist Party or such organizations. Now, that's exactly which is in practice. These are the people, I would say, the most notorious of the individuals that we see in the democratic free nations today, who are nothing but, you can say, the Soviet fellow travelers. They are bringing ideologies of evil construct from Soviet Russia, China, into the democratic free nations, where they have all benefits to enjoy it. However, they're just stricken with this evil ideology, and they're just, I mean, what is basically understood about the communist people is that nothing less than a bullet in their head would be able to change their view. Doesn't matter whether, or rather, whether they're really alive to see it or not, but then it's always a bullet that in their head, in their skull, which basically gives them the second view about the world. So they're so much subverted that they would do anything dedicatedly. Doesn't matter how much time it takes. At times 10 year, 20 year, they work like sleeper cells, and breed, or you can say cultivate the ground for a communist revolution or for a socialist revolution. So having said that, as I've already said, the Indian National Congress, Shiromani Akali Dal, they were all on the shoulders of these farm unions from September itself. Initially, they were very, you can say, very much behind the curtain. But then, after the protest started in Delhi, and they staged the drama here also, the protest and everything, agitation and everything. So then we started seeing these politicians from Indian National Congress, Punjab, and the Shiromani Akali Dal also surfacing, calling it people movement. Well, people movement is also nothing but a communist revolution, and I don't know why the government is not able to comprehend it in the right way to understand what could be rather a damaged situation in in the wake of this farmer protest, because what we are hearing so far is really not good in any sense of what we would be seeing perhaps on 26th of January. I hope the government would take control of everything and would end this menace from the street. But then on the other hand, looking at the trend and the thick skin that these people have, I don't think that the government would be able to get much. They will not be able to gain much ground into it. They're already on a back foot when where they have declared that they would be suspending or would be making it ineffective for next about 1 to 1.5 year. So that's again one of the you can say one of the scores that these farm unions have already been able to gain with the so, to do a deep down study about the Marxist Leninist thought and to do its analysis and to understand the socialist communist conspiracy, there's a very famous quote here that I've got in front of you, and that's from a book called You Can Trust the Communist to Be Communist, written by Dr. Fred Schwartz. Now, this book was written back in 60s in America from an IQ level that any person is in his elementary level of education, like that of schools, colleges, or universities, even if he or she gives just a basic read to this book from A to Z, he or she would be able to gather all information which perhaps is required to understand the socialist communist conspiracy. This book basically gives you kind of an X-ray view of what exactly a communist, socialist person look like, what exactly are their inclinations. Now, this quote, let's just read it to understand our own positions in this whole, I would say, battle between democracy and democratic free nations versus socialist communist conspiracy. So the author says that in the battle of communism, there is no substitute for accurate, specific knowledge. Ignorance is evil and paralytic. Even with the best intentions allied with the most sincere motives, are ineffective and futile if they are divorced from adequate knowledge. Consider a mother who has a small daughter to whom she is devoted. For this daughter, she is determined to do all a mother may do. She feeds her a well-balanced diet to build a healthy body. She provides the finest education to develop her mind. She cares for her spiritual well-being and gives her a lovely home. But let's suppose that in this environment of this young girl, there are a few men who specialize in gaining the confidence of little girls by giving them candies and enticing them into automobiles to molest them. If in that case the mother neglects to give her child the specific information to meet such a situation, she will fail in her duty, and all her loving care will count for nothing when the crisis would come. Thus, the author says that there is no substitute for specific knowledge also while fighting the communist menace. And this basically is our position today, wherein the mother in this quote could perhaps be related to Mother India. And of course, we've been definitely fortunate to get and to be groomed with everything that we have today. And but still, the point is, we do not know in our own society who are these specialized men who have, who have gained the confidence of people who are with perhaps no political thought of their own, and they are very much enticing them into doing, creating ruckus, creating anarchy, perhaps bringing down our own civilization in a longer run. So this basically then tells us how much do we lack a think tank to fight the communist menace. But on the other hand, it also tells us that how systematically these invisible forces of society, the communistic and socialistic ideas, and their patterns of society at large, has also disarmed us of any intellect to understand the philosophy, strategy, and functioning of these people. We thus, by and large, have no idea about the communist conspiracies, and it's perhaps been going on for more than like 100 years. It was going on till 1990s, till the Cold War ended, since its genesis in the Russian Revolution, and perhaps it's still been used, I would say, as the fourth such language of imperialism, and the communist Russia, for that matter, or communist China, for that matter, or to summarize their intentions, the best would be the Communist International, the Comintern, which was in effect, which was there till 1953, and then it dissolved. Nobody knows in what form does it exist in our society, but then it tells us very much how much they have gained the success while being the invisible forces that they have. Pretty much now they are actively, you can consider them as the fourth language of imperialism after what we have seen in the devastated form of invaders, Mughals, then the British colonialist. These people are still enslaving and jeopardizing the interest of Mother India in the 21st century. Also, I have a very famous quote here from another very famous book, The Naked Communist. It's by an ex-FBI W. Cleon's cousin. He says that one of the most fantastic phenomena of the modern times has been the unbelievable success of the communist conspiracy to enslave the whole mankind. Part of this has been the result of two species of ignorance. First, ignorance concerning the constitutional requirements to perpetuate freedom. Secondly, ignorance concerning the history, philosophy, and strategy of the world of commerce. So this is very self-explanatory. It tells us about first of all, our ignorance, understanding the constitutional requirements, which can actually help us perpetuate freedom from a perspective that we would not give ideas of socialist or communist background into a free democratic nation and its functionality. Secondly, why we are not able to do so and why we are a victim of this conspiracy is because we do not know anything about the history, philosophy, and the strategy of these people. world communism for that matter, Comintern, Communist International for that matter. Now, thus, to understand the history, philosophy, I would say, and the strategy of world communism or communism and socialism in India in its form of agitation and protest becomes instrumental in decoding the aggressive stance of the left parties towards a progressive new world that they want to push us into. And it also becomes very important for us to see who are their inspirations and objectives, where exactly are their objectives leading towards. So we can definitely draw parallels, I would say, uh, once we would be able to understand the Marxist, Leninist strategies, their roots, or perhaps their conspiracy. We will be then would be able to decode, or perhaps would be able to draw parallels in current time politics. Now, let's just discuss about the role models of these people who are the modern day players in protest, like such that is happening right now in the name of farm laws, or that we have seen last year in the name of anti CAA NRC. So, to understand these people and where exactly these people are rooted from, we all have to study basically about Marxism, Leninism, and of course, the progenitor was Karl Marx. He was born in 1818 and died in the same century at the end of it. And basically, he talked about and he gave his theory of class struggle, where he said that the history of all times, all societies in the past uh, till now. So, history of all hitherto, as per him, is nothing but a struggle between classes, and the difference between the classes, the struggle between them. So, that being said, he was also very much atheist, and he basically himself was motivated by two people, if I can say, very much. And that was first Charles Darwin and his uh, theory of evolution. So that justified Karl Marx's theory himself, and the other person who really helped him in justifying his theory of class struggle was Friedrich Nietzsche, who gave and who really worked momentously and gave the and different basically worked on the theory of atheism. So atheism, and of course, Friedrich Nietzsche's atheism and Charles Darwin's theory of evolution basically helped Karl Marx to justify his own theory of Marxism, which basically then has really changed this world into really a world that is of immoral beings. Basically, it's a criminal world that we live into, and basically that would summarize Karl Marx and his evil intentions. And basically, when we talk about Karl Marx and his theory, which he propounded, he basically is talking about socializing uh, the nations, and that happens on the shoulders of an armed revolution. It always happens through the barrel of a gun. So he talks about an armed revolution, and that, if you see in today's context, would be the people who are fighting as Naxals, who are fighting the Maoist movements, who are running these movements, and pretty much the Dandakaranya, which is a 1 lakh square kilometer forest in India. It has been already taken over by the Marxist people. So that being said, that's just one element, one kind of people in this whole conspiracy. The other one would be the socialist people. They have their own grounds and their roots from which they are coming. Of course, these were also motivated and inspired by the works of Marx and his theory of a socialist communist state, where it would be a dictatorship of the proletariats, and the class struggle would all not be there anymore, and it will be a people, a country of the people. It will be something wherein everybody would rule the government, and that's all very idealistic. When you see in grounds, it's been more than 100 years Exactly, I guess it's 104th year of the Russian Revolution, and there is no socialist communist nation to be taken as a role model for that matter in regards to this theory. And so let's talk about the other people. That being the Fabian Socialist Society. So these were the earliest of the people, perhaps within a decade or two of Karl Marx dying. There were a group of people who called themselves as Fabian Socialist, and they created the Fabian Socialist Society, which was an underground society. The society was underground, but what their aims and intention was very overt. Okay, so what these people was very covert in comparison to Karl Marx, which talks about an armed revolution, and that happens on the barrel of guns. So that happens very overtly. You can just visit Dandakaranya and you will see the Naxals over there. They have spread even in Bihar and other parts of the country, but this present government have been able to also eradicate a lot of these people. Having said that, that's an armed revolution and that happens very overtly. What happens covert, uh, in a covert fashion, is what these people were aiming back in 1920s Fabian Socialist Society. So their aims was basically to socialize the world incrementally so that it would be a step closer to a communist nation. So their way of doing it was to socialize the world incrementally. They called it socialism by evolution, unlike Karl Marx, who said who talked about socialism by revolution. So there's definitely a difference between the strategy with which these two different faction of people work. I would say more like what you can understand about Fabian socialist society is the role of the government, wherein the government acts like a nanny state. He basically, in a socialist state or a communist state, the father is no longer the head of the family. Instead, it's the government which decides for us and for our individual needs, the structure of the family or that of the society or that of the culture or that of the religion has no role to play in a socialist communist nation, and thus it's the government which basically is the moral figure where our all moral anchors are based, and it's not based in our fathers families. And that's basically, it's again another way of, as I was saying earlier, oppression, or I would say and another way of ruling our minds and subverting us into something very evil. And as I said earlier, there's no such example so far in the history of last 104 years since the Russian Revolution, that we see any ideal society which is based on socialist or a communist idea and which is very prosperous today. Also, basically what they also aim towards is to demand more and more, always, in order to create policy changes slowly, and their aim is to gradually evolve the society into socializing them, and thus creating a socialist nation out of democratic free nations. So that all happens within any democratic free nation. But the Fabian socialist people, their aims, objectives, their way of working and strategies very covert, like what people like Saul Alinsky have propounded. I'll be talking about them in the next slide. So, when we talk about the modern day players, what you can see on the screen now are the three names that you cannot forget, because these people, in different times, in different places, uh, were working for the communist conspiracy and perhaps are the biggest contributor to what we see today is the current form of socialist communist conspiracy. So, starting from Karl Marx, who was influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of atheism, believing that God is dead, and the second was his inspiration that he got from the theory of evolution by Charles Darwin, that humans are a result of unending evolution in nature with men at the top of hierarchy. Thus this basically these two works of great people helped Karl Marx legitimize his own theory of class struggle in politics. His work, especially that of base and superstructure, talks about the parallels like that of all actions in the superstructure happens because of the direct and immediate economic cause at the base of the society, whereas in what he calls as superstructure is the art, the family, the culture, the religion, the philosophy, or perhaps the media, law, politics, sciences, education that we are all understanding and living with, basically our family, the current art form, our current cultural symbols, our religious beliefs. So that's all something that forms the superstructure, which gets promoted by media, regulated by law, propagated by politics, studied by sciences, and then be forward, then to be spread by the education. So that all is basically a superstructure of the society, whereas in Marx says that the base comprises of the tools, the machines, the factories, the land, the raw materials, labor, lumpen proletarians. Lumpen basically means people who are not ready for a communist revolution yet. So those are what lumpen proletarians he is talking about. Petty bourgeois, private property, capital, commodities. So that's all is what Marx says is basically what comprises the base of every society. Now, he also draws a parallel in between these two things, between the superstructure and the base. He says that anything that happens in the superstructure, which is, let's say, for an example, between or within a family, happens because of a direct and an immediate cause, economic cause, because of that economic cause, and that's basically, he says, is a direct action, and it causes economic, you can say, reverberations. So there is definitely critic to it. Not everything that happens in superstructure, for that matter, happens because of an immediate or a direct cause, economic cause. Also because, let's say, just if we discuss it in the form of family, if I buy something for my brother, it does not has to be something related with economy. Perhaps it's just out of love, or for that matter, when you go out and treat someone, you give someone a party, and let's say in your office, you do not wish at times anything in return, and perhaps nothing as an economic cause or as a benefit. Basically, Marx is also saying is that economic direct or immediate cause perhaps would be for your benefit. You would be trying to get something out of it, but as we see in our day-to-day associations or perhaps contacts in the society, in the social form, is not always based on economy. It's also based at times at just friendship, mutual understanding, for that matter. Now, Karl Marx, with these critics at times, which were there in his study, was then reformed majorly by what we can say Antonio Gramsci. He was a neo-Marxist who was influenced by Karl Marx, and thus he simply carried the legacy of Karl Marx ahead to breed a generation of Pavlovian beings raised and subverted to be triggered at the first signal of the communist masters. Antonio Gramsci is also considered to be as one of the most notorious communists of all times. He worked hard. He was sentenced into jail for about 20 years, and there he also almost came to an end of his life because of the trivial conditions that he was going through into the jail. But he worked more. He gave some interesting, I would say, ideas of Marxism, like that of cultural hegemony, or that of uh, as a means, I would say, to legitimize the capitalist state in critics to Marx's absolute historicism and economic determinism, reductionism, and etc. So basically, what Marx says and what he tries to relate to when he says that everything happens into the superstructure happens because of an direct and immediate economic cause. Basically, there's a critics to it, and that's what Antonio Gramsci has been able to formulate in economic determinism and reductionism, where he says that not all the time everything that happens into the superstructure has an immediate and a direct cost to economy, but at the same time he says that perhaps Marx, since he's talking about a long future, discussing perhaps about all societies and all time, so his way of defining things are very concise, and thus it becomes for us important to understand from it. Basically, after Karl Marx is trying to give new theories, saying that this is what Karl Marx meant, but perhaps this is what we need to understand from ourselves. We shouldn't be that naive, and rather should criticize Marx, but perhaps we should understand where Marx himself was coming from and why was he talking about superstructure and base, and thus it gave importance to Antonio Gramsci, because he, being the new Marxist, then kept the tradition going on, which is nothing but the communist socialist conspiracy. Also, when you would study the corpus that he has written, which is about 3,000 pages of jail manual, which is published as a prison notebooks of Antonio Gramsci, you would understand how exactly you can bring down any religion, culture, for that matter, social defenses of any given society. Family structure, he talks a lot about family structure, how to destroy the family. He talks about how to lower down the importance of the father in a family. And he thus, as I said, was one of the biggest and the most notorious communist of all times. He also paved the way for communist goals of 1920s. There's a very famous PDF available on Google. If you can just Google it, you'll be surprised to see what it really carries into it, the communist goals of 1920s. Later on, there's also one thing called as the communist goals of 1958, which is the 45 current communist goals. And that's also somewhere, you can say, is in effect in the fifth column of the world. That basically is to subvert us pretty much from all parallel society, from all, I would say, components of the society. Then their own legacy was being carried forward by Saul Alinsky, who was a 1960s radical, and he has written a very famous book called as Rules for Radicals, which talks about how you can use some central concepts of society, of human polity, and can operate within the system, within the nation, and can break it from within using legit action, forces, and tools for it through the constitutional process. So he, perhaps you can say, is the third generation socialist communist conspirator who really talks in detail how you can even use constitution to destroy culture, societies, nations. Saul Alinsky also, in his famous book, which is The Rules for Radicals, Pragmatic Premier for Realistic Radicals, is what the book's title is. In his very preface, he says, he basically, denotes this book, his writing, which is basically a manual to create radicals, people who can just use the very democracy, its central concepts of human polity, and then can infiltrate institutions like universities, and They can break it from within. That's what basically he's trying to do with the help of this book. And he says that this book is kind of a Bible for all radicals of free nations to bring about a socialist, communistic revolution. I'm just going to read a quote from his book in his preface, where he dedicates his book to Lucifer himself, to the Satan. He says, and I quote, lest we forget at least an over the shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all our legends, mythology, and history. And whom is it to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which? The first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom. So, that's dedicated to Lucifer, so you can understand where these people are coming from. They basically are writing and dedicating their literature to Satan, and they're out there to basically destroy our society and culture. So more about Saul Alinsky would be, I would say, how we can see that staunch communist and socialist people, they go on streets in the free nations, and they talk about the right to protest, freedom of speech, and they basically use and misuse these arguments for the moment, superficially designed for a shorter goal, perhaps like that for conservation of nature, feminism, all that things. But they, in the process of this, create a radical out of a person, it's out of its intellect, and of course, then that person is more towards the subversion, which would be the real intention of these people, and that towards a communist goal, a larger goal. And thus, these people, these three, I would say, have been one of the biggest responsible beings for the socialist and communist dent that they have been able to create in the society. And that's all happening in front of our eyes, one step at a time. Now, the factors thus that we can understand from a socialistic, communistic conspiracy, their role models, perhaps from the writings of what and how exactly people like Saul Alinsky, Antonio Gramsci, they have talked about a communistic, socialistic revolution. So once you would know about these, you would understand what are the direct factors which are in today's time supporting the farmers' protest. So, the attitude of the socialist communist parties towards parliamentarianism was originally, since Comintern, which is the Communist International, is one of utilizing the bourgeois parliament, which is our parliament in democratic nations, for the purpose of agitation. Their whole sole purpose to get into the constitution, sorry, to get into the legislation, into the parliament, is to just create agitation. Participation in parliamentary activity was looked upon from a point of view of developing a class consciousness. Once they gain the parliament, they create the class consciousness, and that is awakening in the proletarian class, and that's kind of a hostility that they create towards the government, the ruling class for that matter. This gave the rise to adaptability of parliamentary tactics of socialist parties, or for that matter, communist parties, to organize legislative activity in the bourgeois parliament, and ever growing significance of various struggle for reforms to serve their own agendas, thus giving an air of legitimacy to these people and an opportunity of carrierism, corruption, and hidden or open betrayal of fundamental interest of the working class themselves. Now, finally, in the present political parlance, if you would like to understand the supporting factors, parliamentarianism, these people are no good, but are simply using the parliament as a tool to create falsehood, deceit, violence, enervating gossip, violation of law, plunder, robbery, ruination of public and private property, resulting in no definite plans or a concrete idea of nation with capitalistic state in existence. Now let's just discuss the three things that I have lined up here in the left side. Uh, in context to the farmers protest, which you can see here, I have just mentioned on the right hand side. So from the first point we can draw that no talks about the amendment of the farm laws in regards to the farm union, who are the active element in this protest. So no talks about the amendments of the farm law has been done so far. Instead, rather they are taking basically a diametrical opposite side in the parliamentary dialogue, such as repealment of the laws at all cost of life and property. It's just another way of basically them opposing any constructive development in the process of enacting farm laws to support the farmers, and they're basically playing the politics over it. Similarly, opposition can be seen also from uh, some of the socialist parties like Samajwadi Party and their ministers when in regards to the COVID-19 vaccination program, which just started from 15th of January this month, and they're calling it as an attempt from BJP to use the vaccine, and perhaps then they're propagating or creating falsehoods saying that you never know, it can create impotency for that matter. Now, also from the second point, we can understand that be it a socialist or an anti-national movement, feminist, be it an environmental, or be it a farmer movement, peace movement, refugee movement, disarmament of arms, revoke of armed forces act, in all these and more, they say one thing and they do another. They talk about something else. Their strategy is something else. And their effort to devoid any constructive parliamentarianism in action and is instead is basically a sugar-coated lie. So they are basically trained liars. What they say is not what they mean, and what they mean is something that they always keep covertly happening. Now we can see thus that they have created farm unions like Bharatiya Kisan Union Agraha, etc. There are about 31, 32 unions of such, uh, like such in farmer in Punjab alone. And in the retrospect to the current political parlance, shares ideological inclinations while championing communist cause have given. So first of all, there is no room for talk or amendment, but rather opting lines of secessionism or total disenchantment with capitalist structure or individuals. So this is one of the basic things that we can pick from the communist conspiracy. And if we just relate that to the present scenario, it we can see that it has already resulted in more than 10 rounds. It's just mentioned 9 here, but it's more than 10 rounds of talk now with no outcome, basically because they just want to agitate. Also, they've been hurling abuses like that to Ambani, Adani, to Modi, to Amit Shah, and to many other institutions like RSS itself. They're also, what they're doing in action is they're destructing the communication towers, which again is basically to hit the capitalist structure or the individuals like Modi and Adani. Now, using the freedom to protest, to blockade Delhi and use it as a pressing valve for anarchy and social instability, like that of riots. So, in the sequence to the last year anti-CAA NRC protest, this time also we can see that NH1, which is the GT road, is been blocked completely, and along with that, major adjoining national highways which leads to Delhi are also closed. There are then further some more similarities that we can draw, like undermining the legislative bodies and calling parliamentarians as thieves, capitalist dogs, fascist, murderer in open street and on loudspeakers. That's one of the phenomena that you would see when the proletarians, they basically target the bourgeois, the ruling class. Now, here also we can see that there's no basically real arguments that these farm unions are bringing in order to then talk more about their agitation, or perhaps to draw a conclusion for the benefit of the farmer and for themselves to go home. But there's no basic real argument behind it. They are not discussing about any clauses or point by point discussion. They don't want to have it with the government. Basically, they are also rejecting the highest order of judiciary that I can say we have in the country, which is the Supreme Court and the committee appointed by them. Now, also we see that a lot of media coverage uh, is always banned, and communist or socialist nations are always, you can say, against the media. Rather, they use that to peddle lies or propagandas. Also, in case of the farmers' protest, we can see that thus it has, you can say, created a barrier between the farmer and the government, because there's no media in action. It's all biased, basically like NDTV and the leftist portals like Quint. There's this woman, Faye D'Souza. She has her own YouTube channel, so that's also very active. Then there's Scoop Whoop Mojo, which is of Barka Dutt, and then a few Punjabi YouTube channels which have now came in the light of this farmers protest, like Rojana Spokesman, Akal Khalsa Aid, which is also an NGO, pretty much I would say a communist front, which is helping the Sikh community right now in their secessionist movement for Khalistan. Then we have Daily Post, Punjabi, and etc. There are a lot of more of these YouTube channels. Now, basically, what are their lenses with which they're, you know, they are able to achieve all this in the postmodernist world? So that's basically the normative political approach that which is basically used to create fallacies of all kind, be it of social, political, of religious background. Then also there is largely, I would say, a political theory, which is the subaltern political theory, and the postmodernism itself, which helps these Marxist and socialist people to, go on with their propaganda and to appropriate the current time in respect to what the history and their own narrations would have been. So, like we can see also here in the farmers' protest, these farm unions have been able to appropriate historical figures like Banda Singh Bahadur as a socialist person, and Narendra Modi as an Aurangzeb who is tyrannical, and on the other hand, Banda Singh Bahadur, who fought against the Mughals and distributed the land back to the peasants of that time. So, peasant in itself is a communist literary word. It's one of the languages. It's one of the results of the language of communist imperialism. So peasants itself, which these people are talking about, was not a word, I guess, in the time of Banda Singh Bahadur, or even the progenitor of the, I would say, the Marxist theory, Karl Marx. He himself was born, I guess, after like 102 years after the death of Banda Singh Bahadur. So, of course, these, I would say, appropriations are always used for a Marxist communist conspiracy, because then they can fool the people based on the narratives that they create, or I would say rhetorics that they create out of these normative political approach that they use. Now, this all is basically done to push a little bit more, gather a bit more ground in an effort of aiming a progressive new world or order. In other words, it's a pure submission to socialism or communism, or its interpretations suited to modern context, just to achieve their agendas. And that's very much been talked about in the 45 current communist goals of 1958. I'm sorry, it's 48 written here, but it's 58. It was basically in 1958 that in the US, I guess, House of Representatives, there was this affidavit submitted, which was more about the 45 current communist goals of 1958, which basically is a summary of The Naked Communist, the book that is the one that I've shown you before, written by W. Cleon Skousen. Now, in today's context, you can see what they mean by pushing us into a new progressive world order. Basically, is fooling the masses and poor farmers in the name of protest for repealing the laws. uh, in case of the farmers' protest, and these people have been drenched in fear of losing their land holdings at the hand of the corporates in coming time, and let's say next 5-10 years. They've been able to gather the fear that if they agree to these laws, they would be uh, basically digging their own grave. Now this also has paved way for secessionist movements in India like Khalistan, Dravidistan, and a long old dream of freeing Kashmir. Remember that these systematic subversions in democratic free nations is to topple the governments and establish them as Soviet Russia's or Chinese satellite for a never-ending communist oppression and an end of all civilizational developments and progress of mankind in this land of Himalayas and the seas. In context to Punjab and the current scenario, of course, what we can see is this end of all civilizational developments in Punjab, or of course, the eradications of all industrialists in coming 5-10 years if this communist menace would grow to another level. Basically, I can say three group of peoples are responsible for all these deaths and everything that's happening in the name of farmers protest. First, of course, being the farm unions, who are basically of an orientation which is very socialistic and communistic, and they give up for nothing. They basically are preparing the ground for the revolution, and anything that they can gain is all positive for them. Anything that they're able to achieve negative also, like the death of the people, it's always not good from a moral perspective. But even these deaths are somewhere for these communistic and socialistic people, or a stepping stone into their careerism in a democratic free nation. Now, apart from that, two other people that would be basically responsible for all this which is happening. And of course, if there's anything that goes wrong on 26th of January this year, first would be Gurpant Want Pannu, who is basically running an organization called as Sikh for Justice. The other one would be Simranjit Singh Mann, who is the head of Shiromani Akali Dal, Amritsar. And of course, the farm unions, along with these two people, are basically responsible for all the menace on the street, rather than represent government, the farm laws, or talk about anything that they want to change. They basically are talking about and basically are doing all agitation, nothing else. And this is all happening in the backdrop, behind the curtain. It's the big elephant that we are forgetting about, which is the referendum 2020. This was basically an international campaign been run by these people, these secessionist forces active in Punjab for last about a couple of years, and they were all hoping for this 2020 for it to be, for them to be holding a referendum for the people of Punjab, and thus pressurizing the Indian government in the international code of law, or be that UN. However, uh, let's see what happens. I'm sure that even if they do something like this, as per the current laws and the way that the UN function, these people would never ever even get a recognition as to be a state. Now, having said that, we all need to understand that why exactly this all is happening. Because if that you think is because of the farmers, well, you can believe that, but then that's not what exactly it is. If it would have been for the farmers, I guess these people would have accepted the farm laws, because there's nothing wrong into it. This all is basically happening to destroy I would say, the fabric of Punjab, or for the larger context, the Indian society, its culture, and basically our Sanatan Dharma. So, well, with that, I would like to thank you guys. This has been my first video. It's already been very long. Still, I would request you guys to watch it till the end, and please share it with your family members, friends. Discuss it more, so to get some insights out of this video. Now, let me just show you some pictures that I've captured, been able to capture. See this capitalist docs, how they are trying to portray. This is all, I would say, a communistic poster. Anything that you can see here is basically something that you can, very well then relate to what the ideas of Marxist communist people are in India. That's basically represented by CPI, CPI-M, and CPI-ML. These are the three parties. Now, look here. Again, this is one such picture where this says Kala Kanun Wapas Lo, Rajnaitik Bandiyon ko Riha Karo. Well, this is with which they are fighting for people like Vara Vara Rao, Umar Khalid. They want them to have they want them to be released, being political prisoners. Now, they also have a Bhagat Singh quote over here, so that's also in regards to what these communist socialist people have been able to appropriate Bhagat Singh. They've been able to portray him like a communist himself. So yeah, this was one of the libraries. You can see Mr. Mao, Karl Marx here, Bhagat Singh, one of you can see figures that they've been able to appropriate. He was definitely a revolutionary, Indian revolutionary, who was very much influenced by Marxism, or for that matter, the Russian Revolution. But of course, he didn't have much of the life that I can say that with which we can really be concrete about where exactly his ideas were going. I mean, I have read the book, which is the Bandi Jeevan, basically an autobiography of Sachindranath Sanyal, who basically formed the Hindustan Republic Association, and Bhagat Singh later on added the word socialist into it and made it HSRA, which was Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, something like that. So, having said that, this is Santji. Now, Bhagat Singh, the photo. We are farmers, not criminals. Farmer, feed the world. This is Damdami Tatsal, a student of which was Sant Jarnail Singh Pinrawala. And here exactly, this is what exactly I was talking about. The whole area is filled with posters like this. This was also shown on very recently ZTV. When I went there, even I captured this picture. This is basically the Anandpur Sahib resolution. And then of course a few quotes here, like Punjab ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਲੰਘਦੇ ਦਰਿਆਵਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਅਨੁਸਾਰ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਪਾਣੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਕਬਜ਼ਾ ਦਾ ਹੱਕ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਵੇ. So such quotes basically which talks about the ideas and inclinations of Sant Jarnail Singh Pinrawala, basically a secessionist, or I would say a sectarian view of Punjab. Okay, Santji, and then you can read this poster. Says देश बचाने वाले मोदी और मोदी के मंत्रियों तथा आरएसएस अडानी अंबानी इत्यादि देशद्रोहियों को अनिश्चित कालीन पुतला दहन. And then they have pictures of Ramdev, they have Ravi Shankar Prasad, Mohan Bhagwat, Amit Shah, Narendra Modi, Nitin Gadkari, Arun Jaitley, Rajnath Singh. Who's the last one? I guess Dinu something, Solanki. Now, this is how they have jeopardized the media, and they have been able to make sure that they do not allow any media. They're really bad to what's happening to the media over there, and they're just pushing them misbehaving with female cameramen or reporters, for that matter. I met these guys. These were from Punjabi University, I guess, PU. Of course, I would say useful idiots for the protest. Nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. Uh, with this one, which was something I wanted to capture, need time machine to travel back to 1950 to give Modi's father a condom. Again, I'm pretty sure it's one of communistic codes. Someone has put it over there. Not all farmers would be even aware about it. Of course, this is too much freedom, I would say, democratic freedom that they're enjoying. Modi Deen, okay. Here's a cow with Kangana edited on his face, another cow with Modi on his face. And this was hold abuses. Anything that you can read here is RSS, and they're abusing RSS. They are hurling abuses to Kangana, Sunny Deol,